Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Tevis-Finn recording from room 114. Welcome to Life During the Great Depression, which is our part 2 in this series. So I'm recording this right before lunch, so I want you guys to just put yourself in this line of people waiting for their one meal of the day. Just think about it. So let's look at how conditions worsened. For the first bullet, guys, banks closing. I want you to note that twice the number of banks closed in 1930 compared to 1929, so a doubling. And in 1932, 30,000 companies were going out of business. And by 1933, 1/4 of the nation's workforce was unemployed. That was 12 million workers. In our next bullet, struggling to get by, I want you again to put yourself in this line and think about where you would get your meals back then if you had no money. So under number 1, private organizations like the YMCA ran soup kitchens that would feed up to 12,000 people daily in New York City. Under number 2, for mortgages, you can just put down that really people couldn't pay mortgages and many lost their homes. Some were even evicted by the courts. And so here is, the effect. The homelessness we see during the Great Depression is monumental. And so under 3, for Hoovervilles, people built shacks on unused or public lands. So they were called shanty towns, but they took on a new name during this era, and they were known as Hoovervilles. For many people blamed President Hoover for their struggles. And under number 4, the nomadic way of life, please put down that many took to the rails. They were known as hobos, and they rode the rails across country, sometimes just for adventure, but a lot of times looking for work and just struggling to get by. So let's talk about the farmers. Under the next bullet, the Dust Bowl. I want you guys to understand this basic cycle of farming that went on in the Midwest. And so guys, farmers uprooted the grasses, to plant things like wheat. But the grasses held the soil's moisture. And so when crop prices fall, remember how we said after World War I, their supply and demand changes, many farmers just left their fields uncultivated. And then a major drought struck, right? And so with no rain, the soil turns to dust. And with the kick-up of winds during this time, it buried crops, animals. You can note here there's a barn that's half under the dirt, and there were even deaths due to suffocation. And so many lost their farms to the banks, and so families such as these headed west to work as migrant workers in California, picking fruit. So you guys should know the two main starting places for these poor farmers was Oklahoma and Arkansas, and so they became known as the Okies and the Arkies. And so here they just put all of their possessions into a vehicle and head out. Very poor living conditions in some of these camps. Alright, so before we move away from the Dust Bowl, you guys should just know that the area known as America's wheat fields, right, the breadbasket, stretched from the Dakotas to Texas. It became known as the Dust Bowl, because the number of dust storms increased during the 1930s, and many of these farmers even joked that all they had was dust to eat. So go on to your next bullet, the superhero genre. And so what can you do to get your worries off your mind? You can escape. So turning to movies and radio and even comic books, that was a new way to deal with stress. So under comic books, you guys can put down that by the late 30s we saw this new genre of like Superman and Batman become very popular, and this new genre certainly provided an outlet or an escape for people during this tough time. So under Hollywood, how many Americans went to the movies each week? It was pretty affordable to go, and so more than 60 million Americans went to the movies each week. The popular child actors and actresses, one was Shirley Temple, which we can watch a clip of her. and a famous comedian, Groucho Marx here, pictured on the right. Under 3 for famous movies, you guys should know that Mickey Mouse started all the way in 1928, so Snow White was the first one in 1937. Some other famous movies you guys should know, The Wizard of Oz, and King Kong here, pictured on the right, was epic. So here's a photo of the debut of Snow White. And the big movie was Gone with the Wind. So you guys can put down, it came out in 1939. And pictured here on the right is Hattie McDaniel. She was the first African American actress to win an Academy Award. She's here, a slave comforting her mistress, Miss Scarlet. And so moving on, next bullet, on the air, tens of millions listened to the radio daily. Under 2, some of the famous radio comedians were Jack Benny, George Burns, and Gracie Allen. This is George Burns with Gracie, and over here this is Jack Benny. Under 3, the radio adventures. The Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger became very popular shows to listen to. People tuned in every week to find out what happened. And soap operas became very popular. So you guys can put down, the first one is a radio drama known as Guiding Light. And remember, the commercials that sponsored were laundry soap manufacturers. So that's how they got their name, soap operas. And it offered people a way to connect to others during this difficult time. You know, they got interested in other people's lives and stories and tuned in weekly. So here's the original cast of the Guiding Light daytime radio show. Alright, so I want to go over 2 books for literature. The Grapes of Wrath was written by John Steinbeck in 1939. So what he does is he describes the plight or the suffering of the Joad family. They're migrant, farmers. They leave the Dust Bowl and they find new life in California as migrant workers. So to write this book under B, he did interview migrant families and he did visit the camps that these fruit workers lived in. This is the famous movie that was made after the book, and this is a famous actor, Henry Fonda. The second book is The Sound and the Fury, and it was written by William Faulkner. So Faulkner used a new writing technique known as stream of consciousness. So I want you to know that it's a style of writing where the characters, their thinking and their feelings, you can actually read it, before they speak it to the other characters in the novel. And so what it did is it really exposed the attitudes of Southern whites and blacks during this time period. And just as something for you guys to know, this was one of the more difficult books I had to read. It is very difficult to understand because he switches back and forth between stream of consciousness and regular writing style. And lastly, art. So a new style came about in the 1930s. It was known as the regionalist style. And it portrayed traditional American values, such as the rural Midwesterners and all of their hard work. And so I want you to put down the best known painting is known as American Gothic, and the painter's name is Grant Wood. And lastly, I'd like to leave you with this slide, why you should study history with Tev. For that is a famous painting, the American Gothic, that has been used today over and over again. So now if you ever see these, you'll know where it comes from. Grant Wood, guys, the regionalist school from the 30s, and his first one, remember, is called the American Gothic, and it is a huge parody we still see today in cartoons. This is Tabby signing off.